Okay. Here's a good one. Did man and dinosaurs coexist? This is an interesting question because why? Because if they did, either man has existed a lot longer than the fossil record shows, or dinosaurs did not die out 66 million years ago. Can't have them both. So it's a big problem. And I'm going to get into a little bit of what's called cryptozoology. It's not true science. It's a little bit of an amateur deal. And another thing called OOPARTS, OOPARTS, that's out of place artifacts, that people find things that don't fit the history that they're found in somehow. So some of that is used in some of this. Some of it's actual scientific discoveries. But so let's get into that. Let me say that the word dinosaur, the atheists write in and they say, well, the Bible doesn't talk about dinosaurs, so the Bible's wrong. And so there's no God. This is their logic. Okay. The problem is that the word dinosaur was invented by Sir Richard Owen, who's the superintendent of the British Museum in 1841. Prior to that time, or prior to 1841, dinosaurs were called dragons. Do you know that? The word dinosaur is a recent word. It was not a biblical word. I mean, the Bible doesn't talk about computers, so God doesn't exist. Doesn't talk about airplanes. I mean, what kind of logic is that? So, bottom line, the Bible talks about dragons over 35 times. Leviathan, behemoth, these are all large animals. And so the Bible, in fact, does talk about dinosaurs, but it calls them dragons because that was the word that people used. You ever wondered about dragon lore around the world? Every culture has dragon lore. You ever wondered why that is? It's because man and dinosaurs coexisted. Okay, let me give you some proof here. Numerous sites where human or human-like footprints and dinosaur footprints exist together. Did you know one of them is right down the road near Glen Rose? My wife and I and our kids went to see this. We saw it with our own eyes in a limestone riverbed. For $5, the whole family got to go down to the riverbed and look. And you can see, it looks like T-Rex prints and a man's footprints. My wife observed them. Go next door to the Dinosaur Valley State Park, and you go look for the man's footprints, and they're not there. Now why? The state came and cut them out and took them away. So if you go to Dinosaur Valley Park and you ask for the man footprints, they'll say they don't exist because the state cut them out and took them somewhere and nobody knows where they went. But if you go next door to the guy who owns part of that riverbed as part of his property that we did, you can see them. Interesting deal, but that's been discredited. A lot of that site has been so analyzed by scientists, and if you just don't want to believe something, they just say, well, it's not a man's footprint. Well, that's not science. It's just an opinion. Anyway, I would worry about it, except I've seen it myself. So, okay, the McFall Trail, the Riles Tract, the Morris Tract, the Burdick Tract, the New Mexico Tract, the Turnage Patton Tract, all of these have man's footprints and dino prints in the same rock. Let's see, talk about Glen Rose. But there are other places, not just here, Illinois, Kentucky, Arizona, around the world, South America, Mexico, and Turkey. I've seen photos of the man and dino prints in the hills in Turkey, and I mean, they are just very obvious. Anyway, so that would indicate that there was a coexistence period of some sort. Large areas of Mongolia in the 1920s produced dinosaur bones alongside modern animal bones as well as men's bones. This exploration was headed up by Russian explorer Peter Kozlov, and I've read a newspaper article about this find that was published. You can find that on the internet. The Devil's Corkscrew Tunnels. These are made by prehistoric paleocrater beavers 30 million years ago. These were tunnels that looked like corkscrews in the ground. They made them out of mud. And when the early explorers found those, they found that the Lakota Indians had a name for them because they'd seen them, and yet they're prehistoric. How'd that happen? Interesting. They had a name for the tunnels and they had a name for the beaver. Around the world, we find terracotta figurines, burial stones, burial cloths, stone carvings, engravings, and cave paintings of dinosaurs made by ancient people. This is included in areas such as Mexico, the Grand Canyon, Australia, Peru, and other areas in South America. There are those that have investigated dragon lore of China, Europe, Africa, and the Americas, and feel that these are not myths, that these were actual sightings of dinosaurs that people had in ancient times, and made various paintings or figurines to represent that. So again, it's just another part of the proof that man and dinosaurs existed at the same time. There have been unofficial sightings of flying dinosaurs in South America in recent history. You can believe that or not. Dinosaurs have been called overgrown reptiles. You know, reptiles will grow continuously unless they are preyed upon or have an illness. And so many people feel like dinosaurs are just overgrown reptiles because of the environmental conditions maybe at the time, a lot of other reasons. But they feel like they were just reptiles that grew and grew and grew, and we call them dinosaurs. Again, the cryptozoologists, they look for cryptids. These are supposedly extinct animal forms, and there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that they have collected that dinosaurs did in fact exist with man. Jungle areas in South America and other places. Living fossils, we talked about those. I have examples of those. Here's an interesting thing. In 2005, this lady was a paleontological scientist, Mary Schweitzer. She discovered T-Rex bones with intact connective tissue, blood vessels, and other soft tissue. This was in the newspaper. And the scientists can't do anything about it because she brought the stuff in and had it peer-reviewed by atheists. Said, well, it looks like it's real. Now, question. Dinosaurs went extinct 65 to 66 million years ago, but here's one that's got soft connective tissue that never dissolved and never fossilized. How'd that happen? Did you know they found woolly mammoths in ice flows, in glaciers, at the Arctic and Antarctica that were so fresh you could eat the meat? Flash frozen for 100 million years? I don't know. Interesting. She took a lot of heat for this, and she followed this up, repeated it, this discovery sometime later with another find of a duck-billed dinosaur. It included red blood cells and collagen. This is an extinct prehistoric animal. How did it avoid destruction of soft tissue? Soft tissue goes real quick. It vaporizes, it dissolves, it doesn't last. What lasts is the bones. So that's a real problem. There was a huge find like this in China, in Jeho Biota. They uncovered a feathered dinosaur, and I'm not going to pronounce the name. This fossil was complete with fur, feathers, and skin. And this is an animal that was supposed to have lived 60 million years ago. Something's wrong. The woolly mammoth is regarded as prehistoric, but in Vero Beach, Florida, we have mammoth bones, mastodon bones, giant ground sloth bones, and human bones all found together. They also find woolly mammoths with flint arrowheads in them or around them. Evidence for a worldwide flood comes from many dinosaur graveyards, yielding thousands of bones all collected in one spot, just like you'd have if you had a heavy rainfall or landslides that would collect all of these in one spot. That's one of the theories. Like Noah's flood. Dinosaur National Monument, world's largest Jurassic dinosaur graveyard, contained 10 perfectly preserved parts of human skeletons in the lower Cretaceous Dakota sandstone. Now these were discredited because they said what the deal was, the Indians just happened to use this dinosaur area for their burial ground, and they didn't know it, but they happened to bury their loved ones in the same area as these dinosaur bones. So that's how I explain that. Well, the problem is they're all the same strata. So either the Indians dug up the dinosaur bones and knew it and put their bones right next to them, or they coexisted. Interesting deal. Folklore about dragons. All over the world there are dragon stories, and because that is the name for dinosaurs in those times, it's believed that what people are actually describing is dinosaurs. Famous people throughout history have documented this. One was Marco Polo. Remember in the 1200s, he went to China, found a lot of interesting stuff. He came back, wrote his memoirs. I have a copy, I don't know if it's here, maybe at home, copy of that part of the diary that talks about the Emperor of China training dragons to pull his chariots. And there are a lot of dinosaur bones in ruins found in China. Interesting deal. Other famous people, Alexander the Great, y'all remember him? He documented dragons in India. Herodotus, a famous Greek historian, documented dragons in Egypt. Jewish historian Josephus, have a copy of his book down here. He talks about dragons, dinosaurs. Dragon slayers of the past were folk heroes. My conclusion is that man and dinosaurs coexisted at one time, and dinosaurs were hunted to extinction, just like bison and other animals are. I'm studying, this is not in the book, there's a couple of areas of research I'm doing now. I won't talk about this a whole lot. One is the area of giants. Remember the Bible said there were giants in the land? Did you know that there really were? There were giants in North America. They're called mound builders. And all in the Northeast and Midwest, they have mounds. They have people that are incredibly tall, 12, 15 feet tall. So the Bible's correct again. The other thing I'm studying right now is the intelligence of ancient man. We look at ruins of temples and bridges and aqueducts and coliseums, and the stones that go into those structures weigh as much as 500 tons each. How do you raise a 500-ton stone goes in a column to a temple 60 feet in the air? Nobody knows. Ancient man was not stupid. Ancient man was very intelligent. In fact, Adam and Eve probably were the supreme intelligence on the planet at the time. And we've been trained to believe that man sort of learned how to do upright, and then we lived in caves, and then we did some cave paintings, and then we learned about fire, and then we learned how to make little flint things, and that's not what the archaeology and the paleontology show. They show man as very intelligent from the get-go. 6,000 BC in Samaria, you have buildings that are made out of blocks. You have cities. You have streets. In some cases, you have plumbing systems. So these people did a lot more than we do with a lot less. So anyway, that's a whole other subject. Okay, history, archaeology, geography, anthropology, sciences, evidence for the Bible's accuracy, in my mind, is indisputably and undeniably proven by the archaeological historical records. The Bible has never been shown to be incorrect historically or archaeologically. Let me give you a few of the findings. These are thousands of findings, but this comes after 25,000 site excavations over a 250-year period from Egypt to Turkey. 50 people known in the Old Testament are known outside the Bible. One of the things that atheists bring up is, well, the Bible, the only way you know those people is from the Bible itself. Not true. 50 people in the Old Testament are known outside the Bible from outside sources, non-biblical sources. Oldest Hebrew text on a silver amulet from 7th century BC. Had Numbers 6:24 on it. Let's see, Jeroboam's altars have been found. I'll skip through some of the Pool of Siloam and the stairs. Remember the Pool of Siloam from the New Testament? That's been found. David and Solomon's tombs, David's palace, Joshua's altar at Mount Ebal, that's been found. Jericho with the walls that fell out, they cannot explain that. The secular atheist historians like to say, well, they didn't fall out, they kind of fell down, and then the kind of process of falling down, some of them kind of flipped out, and there's all these excuses for the obvious observation that the walls fell out. I've seen the digs on it, and they just continue to argue about that, and the evidence is there in the excavation. I don't know, just mind-boggling. The Moabite stone, skip that. King Uzziah tablet. Sargon, some of the later Old Testament people, Sargon vase, Nebuchadnezzar, the cylinder of Nebuchadnezzar, stele of Shalmaneser, mentions Ahab, also the seal of Jezebel, the Cyrus cylinder of Cyrus II of Persia, 17,000 tablets of Ebla. I know there's been a little bit of dispute over this, but they tend to corroborate the Genesis account. Sodom and Gomorrah has been found with evidence of massive burning in the structures. Interesting. There was a conflagration, they say, and that's even true of atheists. So there's obviously something that happened there that was fairly significant. Solomon's copper mines, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Y'all know the Dead Sea Scrolls. Probably one of the greatest finds in our generation. If you look at the Old Testament scriptures in those scrolls, they read like your Bible. And this was printed 200 BC. No change. Interesting. Noah's Ark. Okay, I know. Be some discussion about that. I've seen a number of YouTube things about Noah's Ark. There are stone anchors that were found at the base of the mountains of Ararat. There's a village there. 4 anchors. These are large, heavy stones that are in shape of triangle with a hole at the top. And those who study ancient shipbuilding said those were used as stone anchors in ancient shipping. Why are they sitting in a plain in the mountains of Ararat with inscriptions on them? Nobody knows. 4 of them sitting right there in the plain. And a village grew up next to those, and those people believe that that's the anchors to Noah's Ark's boat. I don't know. Jury's still out. People still looking for the ark. Okay, hundreds of findings for the New Testament. Let me go through those. 27 people known in the New Testament are known outside the Bible from non-biblical sources. Modern cities like Rome, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nazareth, you can go to those today. They're still there, just like right out of the Bible. Same location. 7 churches of Asia, now in Turkey. They're mentioned in Revelation, routinely visited by tourists today, including Ephesus. These are all tourist areas. Pool of Siloam was found. I mentioned that earlier. Virtually all the major cities that Paul visited in his New Testament travels in Acts are either available today in ruins or actual modern cities. I have Augustus Caesar coins. I have a posthumous down here in a coin collection, an Augustus Divus coin. When Caesar Augustus died, he became a god. Divus is Latin for God. It's where we get our word diva from. And so it's Augustus God. And it was issued after he was dead. And I have this is not a facsimile or a reproduction. It's a real coin that some Roman has had their hands on. And it's in the collection there. You can look at it yourself. Pontius Pilate's known from coins, inscriptions at Caesarea Maritime stone, list him as the proconsul there. in Jerusalem. Herod the Great coins King Aretas. Felix and Festus. Do y'all remember Felix and Festus from Acts? Paul was incarcerated and then interrogated by Felix. They have coins down here minted in their reign, both of their reigns, Felix and Festus. Here's an interesting deal that's come up in recent history. There was an ossuary, which is a bone box. I don't know, maybe y'all may or may not be familiar with that. The Jews at the time of Christ would bury people in tombs, and then when the flesh went away and there was nothing but bones, they'd take the bones out and put the bones in a box, put the box back in the tomb. That helped them save space. So you'd have an entire body in a box, and it was called an ossuary. Okay? So recently, within 5-10 years ago, a guy in Jerusalem had a friend over, and he said, "Hey, would you look at this box I bought from an antique guy? It's got some inscription, I can't read it." The inscription, when it was translated, said, "James, the brother of Jesus, the son of Joseph." Interesting, because linguists of that time said the chance that you could have that combination of names is extremely remote, possibly even not possible. So the nation of Israel sued the guy who sold this ossuary to an American, and they claimed it was fraud. 5 years that suit took. And they brought in experts from all over the world to examine this box. They brought in a German who was the world's leading expert on inscriptions in boxes like that. He examined it with scanning electron microscope, and he said, those etchings are original, and the box dated to around 100 AD. Interesting deal. May have found the bones of James, the brother of Jesus. Don't know. One of the claims atheists make, there's no confirmation of Jesus or Christianity outside the Bible. Wrong. Let me give you some examples. Other extra-biblical people who talk about Jesus and or Christianity: Tacitus. He was a Roman. He wrote the Annals. Josephus. He was a contemporary of Jesus, a Jew, and not a Christian. His book's down here. He writes about Jesus. I've got them tagged if you'd like to look at those. Suetonius, Roman. He's the secretary to Emperor Hadrian. Lucian was a Greek. Phlegon was a Greek. Mara bar Serapion. He was a Syriac. The Jewish Talmud, which is not Christian, it's the Jewish book, talks about the hanging of Jesus. Seneca was a Roman advisor to Nero. Celsus, here's an interesting deal. Celsus was a Greek. He wrote the Account Doctrine. How we know he's real is because we have early church father writings, and I have 25 volumes of those at home that go from 100 AD to 400 AD. One of the early church fathers was a guy named Origen. Origen wrote a treatise in the book that I have down here called Against Celsus. And he wrote against the book that Celsus wrote. Now you may be saying, Paul, you're making this up. I've never heard of any of these books. I've never heard these people. I've never heard any books. What's the secret source you went to find these? Okay, here's my secret. It's called Amazon.com. Don't tell anybody. That's a secret deal. You can get the same info. I've got the books down here, and I've got them tagged if you'd like to look and see where that particular author talks about Jesus, who is not a Christian. Okay, who else? Celsus, Emperor Trajan. Have a number of apocryphal and pseudepigraphal books. These are books. Dan Brown in the Da Vinci Code was wrong. He wrote about these books that were lost, and real Christianity was somehow lost in these books, and that we found them now, and I've got them down here, right here. The lost books of the Bible, right down here. I read them all. They weren't lost. They were not recognized by the church because they were not canonical. I've read them. They don't read right. They don't read. You don't get inspiration from them, or they were redundant. They weren't lost. They were rejected. This is the thing, and most people don't know that. What are they? Book of Maccabees, Baruch, Tobit, Judith. I know some of this is Catholic. Gospel of the Ebionites, Gospel of the Nazarenes, Gospel of the Egyptians, Gospel of Thomas, Bar Kokhba, the Proto-Evangelon, Nicodemus, Trallians, Magnesians, Barnabas, Laodiceans, and they're all down here. Known by the church, rejected by the church, not lost. We have also 15,000 other early fragments and tracts and manuscripts from early church father writings from the 2nd to the 4th century, all validating Jesus and Christianity. There's more evidence for the life of Jesus than any other ancient figure. He's been more examined than any other figure in history. A lot of famous spiritual people, Buddha, Mohammed, other philosophers, Socrates, Aristotle, many of these people that were written about hundreds or even 1,000 years later after they lived. The eyewitness accounts for Jesus were written 30 years after his death. That's the earliest eyewitness account of any ancient figure ever existed in history. That's pretty telling. So, more evidence for Jesus in Christianity than there is for Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato, and yet nobody would deny that those people were not real, and yet the writings on them sometimes are 400 or 500 years after they lived. To sum that up, the Bible is very authoritative. The fact is, the Bible is used to find civilizations. Archaeologists use the Bible. Case in point, the Hittites. Do you remember the Hittites from the Old Testament? Okay. For years, they couldn't find them. And so the atheists said, no Hittites, can't find. We've been up and down the Middle East, no Hittites. So the Bible's wrong, God doesn't exist. Somehow we get to this logic, boy, it rolls. So no Hittites for several decades. And then a guy in Turkey one day got his goats up in the hills, and he sees this stone with inscriptions on it. And goes, wow, that's kind of cool. And there's a cave with all this stuff in it. So he goes back and reports. And suddenly there's this army of archaeologists and paleontologists that descend on this site. And they start finding all this stuff. And there's these writings, and we've never seen writings like this. We don't know what this is. So they said, wait a minute. The Hittites are supposed to live in the northern part of the Middle East. Let's call in this German expert who is a world-renowned expert on the Hittite civilization. And they flew him in, and he said, you have discovered the center of the Hittite Empire. It's right here. And I can tell you what that stone says. Interesting deal. So, a lot of people say that, the Bible's not reliable. It is reliable. And it's so reliable that it's used to find civilizations. Interesting deal. Okay. Psychology, parapsychology, brain consciousness, and near-death experiences. Anybody ever had a near-death experience? Anybody ever had a family member that had one? My dad had one. Had a brain tumor, had surgery. He didn't tell me, but my mom told me that he saw the white light, the tunnel. This has become, in recent years, an area of investigation, scientifically and otherwise. A guy in the 80s, forget his name right now. Moody. He was a doctor. And he kept hearing people that said, well, when I was on the table, I had this vision or something, and I kind of think I went to heaven, kind of like, I don't know. It was beautiful and wonderful, and there was white light and a tunnel thing. And so he started investigating these stories and found out they were very common. And they were called, he termed them near-death experiences. Well, a lot of times they're not near death. Sometimes they're death. We got one coming out now, 90 Minutes in Heaven by, I think, Don Piper. That's a movie. It's out. Heaven is for Real was a movie recently about this subject. I believe there's something going on, folks. There was a lady. I saw her testimony, and I saw her surgeon's testimony on YouTube in Canada. She had a nearly inoperable brain tumor down in her brain, and there was only one guy in Canada could do the surgery. And he said, I saw his testimony, and he doesn't say anything about heaven or anything. He said, I don't know what she saw. I'm just telling you, I'm the surgeon. I can tell you what I did. They killed her. drained her brain. Because if they had operated on her brain with blood flowing in it, she would have bled to death. So they killed her, drained the blood out of her brain. He said she was flatlined every physiological way that you could come at it. And she went out of her body and she went to heaven. And she said, it's the most beautiful thing you have ever seen. She said, I cannot express in words what I saw. Paul talks about this. And I'm wondering, maybe if he had an experience like that. Let's see, that was in 2 Corinthians 12, 2 and 3. He says, I don't know if I was in my body or out, but I saw things I can't even tell you about. That's what these people say. The beauty of heaven and the love that they experience, they say, is indescribable. Others have gone to hell. And I have watched some of those and I've had to turn them off. They are so frightening. What they saw. Many have been rescued from hell. Many people who were dead. I mean, they were flatlined, dead, involved in car wrecks, crushed. I've seen all kind of stories. And I've got a number of books down here. Since this has become popular now, more and more people are investigating it, and more books have been written. And I believe that, I know that there's been some discussion about all this, but I believe that there's something going on. This lady that I was telling you about had the brain surgery. She came back and she told the surgeon, you used a tool that looked like this. She drew the tool. And he said, well, I didn't have that out of my box until you were dead. He said, how do you know that? And she said, I went right out of my body and I hovered in the room and I saw you cutting my brain open. And here's the tool you used. And by the way, here's the other tools you used. How could she have known that? She's not a surgeon. She was dead. Only way she could know that is if she was outside her body. And then she left the room and went to heaven. So the Bible says when you're dead, your spirit is not here. We don't linger around as ghosts. So I think there's something to this. There's a lot more research going on in this area now, and I believe these experiences are real, and I believe people are seeing glimpses of heaven. Okay, let's take a look at the science of linguistics. It used to be called philology in the past. This is a scientific study of language, spoken and written. Wow, am I running over? Okay. It's not a new study, new science. 5th century BC in India they were studying this. 3rd century BC in Greece they were studying this. People have always been interested in how we know how to talk and write. And it's not anything new. But after 2,500 years of research, we still can't answer why only humans have the ability to speak. Did you know your voice box, your vocal cords, your tongue, your mouth are all uniquely configured to do what I'm doing right now? Dogs don't do that. Cats don't do that. Whales don't do that. Birds don't do that. They may cheep and squawk and bark and whatever. They don't talk. The configuration of their esophagus won't allow that. Just humans. Why is it that no other animal talks but us? Don't know. There was thought that there was a mother language. If we all evolved, then there was originally a mother language that we all spoke. We got to find it. And so they've looked and they've looked and they've looked, and no mother language. Can't find one. I've sort of given up on that as well. If you look at commonalities of languages, there's not a whole lot. You look at Chinese writing, Korean writing, Japanese writing versus the way we write, it's not even close. So if we all evolved, why don't we all speak the same language today? I have an answer, a biblical answer. Tower of Babel. Did you know that's the only explanation for that phenomena? Philologists today have said, you know what? These questions are probably impossible to find out about. And so let's just don't worry about it anymore. Now that's scientific, isn't it? We don't know how that happened, so we're just going to ignore it and move on to something else. Wow. Okay, so my answer, God gave mankind the ability to converse, gave mankind language, and the Tower of Babel confused the languages, and that explains it. But anyway. Okay, let's look at astronomy, astrophysics, cosmology. Scientific anthropic principle says the universe somehow is finely tuned for life. By whom? How? Why? Don't know. It just seems to be that way. Richard Dawkins says, well, it's that way because it had to be that way. That's scientific, isn't it? Four major forces. I know there's other things we talk about. Four major forces control the entire universe: gravity, electromagnetic force, weak and strong atomic forces. If you tinker with any one of those by 1/1000%, we don't have a universe. How did that happen? Why 4? Why not 10? Why not 50? And how are they all finely tuned? If you change the atomic force, the atoms either implode or explode. You can't tamper with those four forces. 322 parameters have to be just right for the universe as we know to exist. Chance, 1 times 10 to the 304th power. It's almost 4 times the limit of impossibility. Another independent source put that at 1 times 10 to the 511th. 27 factors have to be exactly right for Earth to be habitable. I don't know if you ever thought about this. This includes things like the mass of the moon, the distance of the moon from the Earth, the number of moons we have, the rotation of the Earth, the rotation of the moon. Do you know the moon rotates on its axis? Just happens to be the exact same spin as the Earth, so we always see the same face. But it's spinning on its axis. How'd that happen? Nobody knows. Earth's angle of tilt, the Earth's magnetic field, atmospheric composition of gases and depth, the aurora borealis. Thank God for the aurora borealis. If it wasn't for that, we'd all fry. You know what that is? That's the Earth's magnetic field trapping solar harmful radiation from the sun and from outside of our solar system. And the rest of that stuff is trapped by the atmosphere that we have. It's the right depth and the right density to trap most of the harmful stuff coming to us from outside space. Wow, how'd that happen? Don't know. Things like the distance of the solar system from the Milky Way core, our position in the Milky Way, the Earth's distance from the sun, the stability of our sun, the abundance of water. Only thing we found, we're the only thing we found in the universe so far has water like we have it. Find a lot of places with frozen CO2, frozen nitrogen, but not water like we have it today on this planet. The existence of Jupiter and Saturn as traps for incoming debris from outer space, asteroids, comets, other things. Those big guys, those bad boys on the outside, they trap all that stuff, and because of their mass, they attract that stuff so it doesn't come into the inner part of the solar system. How'd that happen? Don't know. Carbon-based form of life. The Earth's essentially circular orbit around the sun instead of elliptical. Do you know if we had an elliptical orbit, we would alternately freeze and burn up? But we're almost circular. I think there's 1 million miles different between a perfectly circular orbit and slightly elliptical. But it's not enough to cause a problem for life on this planet. Another amazing deal. 20 cosmological constants have to be just right for the universe to exist. Chance, 1 times 10 to the 120th. Now, if you start putting all this together with the biologic stuff that I talked about earlier, I mean, it's beyond impossible. It's way beyond impossible. Here's a good one. In order for the universe to exist and life to exist, there have to be laws. Laws of physics, laws of chemistry, laws of biology, laws of mathematics. Laws are invisible. And did you know that laws have to be in place before the Big Bang? Otherwise, the energy and matter created in the Big Bang don't know how to relate to each other. Laws have to govern their behavior. So the laws have to be in place if there was a Big Bang before there could be a Big Bang. Does that make sense? Otherwise, energy and matter, they don't know what to do. They don't know how to relate to each other. So you have nothing. Well, where do laws come from? They're invisible. They're just like information. You ever thought about that? How did laws come to be in place on our universe? No answer. Science has no answer for that. They understand the laws, don't know where they came from because they're invisible. They don't evolve. They have to be. We know that information has to be impressed on a system by an outside source. Who is that? We know him as God. Okay, design science. What are the elements of design? Intentionality has to be a visible, perceptible, logical reason for anything we see. Richard Dawkins would go to Mount Rushmore and go, wow, look at that. Look at the millions of years of air and water erosion perfectly created 4 busts of U.S. presidents. Isn't that amazing? But any reasonable person would go and say that was designed, some guy sat on a swing stage and carved that. It shows design. So there was intentionality in that representation of those busts. Irreducible complexity, talked about that earlier. Design to a target. Evolution cannot design to a target because the target is not known. It's an interesting concept if you stop and think about it. Tonight, 3 a.m. when you're up rolling around, think about that. I will. I will be up at 3 o'clock. Okay, multiple uses for a common element. This is not evolution, it's common sense. Look at cars. Look at cars we make. They all have a frame, a chassis, tires, engine, transmission, windows, common elements, but they all look different. They're designed differently. They're designed to look different, but they have the same elements. We do the same thing as God. That's called having some common sense and efficiency in your design. My read on all that, there is intelligent design indicated in our universe, and God is that intelligent designer. Okay. From philosophy, not science, I know, this is a freebie, I'm throwing this in. Classical philosophical arguments for God include the cosmological argument. This goes back to Aristotle, has to do with cause and effect. For every cause, there's an effect. Someone has to be the first cause. Who is that? We know him as God. God was the first cause. The ontological argument, this involves the idea because you can even think of or even comprehend or conceive of a God, he must exist. He must necessarily exist and indicates a God consciousness buried deep within each of us. Anthropological argument has to do with the idea of human beings being spiritual, not just physical. Quest for meaning and purpose in humans, the sense of why, as opposed to animals, indicates an intelligent design. And lastly, the teleological argument, this is akin to the anthropic principle, says that a finely tuned universe shows the stamp of a supreme intelligence and design, and thus of a designer. Everything has to be right, and the probabilities are so high that the only logical, rational conclusion is that the universe was designed by an intelligent source. Okay, ultimate questions. How did the universe come into being out of nothing? Now, let me define nothing, because Krauss and Dawkins and Hitchens and the rest don't get this. Here is the definition of nothing. No space, no time, no energy, no matter, and no physical laws. That's nothing. Now, you've got to get something out of that. That's the only way to start with nothing. Now, Krauss and others have written books on how they explain something from nothing. But let me just say that aliens, multiverses, infinite parallel universes, quantum disturbances in space-time, zero-sum matter-antimatter concepts, bubble universes, black holes, wormholes, those are not nothing. Those are something. I could ask, where did those come from? I've had kids, I've debated this with kids that are atheists on the internet. Well, everything came out of evolution. What? let's start at the beginning. Where did the universe come from? How did you get the universe out of nothing? One kid said, Big Bang. That answers that. Big Bang. I said, well, where did that come from? Who designed all that? Where did the matter and energy come from? You're a narrow-minded bigot. So when we can't prove something, we become bigots. Anyway, let me just say something that on this, and I hate to keep referring to this ministry, but when I get write-ins now from the atheists, I say, okay, I need for you to prove your position. It's not up to us, folks. I tell them God's self-evident. Creation, Jesus Christ, and the Bible. That's God's proof. Now, I want you to disprove all of that. And I want you to explain to me how everything came out of nothing. The burden of proof is on you. The burden of proof is not on us as Christians. The burden of proof is on the atheist to prove their position. They can't just say, well, God doesn't exist. Prove it. Then you become a narrow-minded bigot. The atheist has the low road, folks. We have the high road. We have the real answer. And atheism just does not make any sense. I've been there. I've been on that side. And it's bankrupt. I mean, they just don't have any answers. You can't explain something from nothing with atheism. An eternal, uncreated God is the only solution. A funny story about that. You may have already heard this. A group of scientists got together and said, well, God, we have learned how to create life. We don't need you anymore. And so would you like for us to show you how? God said, yeah, sure, I'd like to see that. So the scientists get in their Land Rover, and they drive out to the desert, and they said, okay, now we're going to show you how we can create life. That makes you irrelevant. And so God says, okay, well, go ahead. So the scientists reach down to get some dirt, and God says, wait a minute. Got to make your own dirt. We got to start from nothing, not from something. So that is a crucial element when you talk to an unbeliever. These other things are all something. Anthony Flew, world-famous atheist, y'all may know the name, shocked the atheist world recently. Faced with all of the evidence I've given you tonight, a hard-nosed atheist wrote a book that said, there is a God. It's right down here. And I read it, and I read his story. And he said, I have spent my life studying science, and I can no longer believe that this just happened on its own. There is a God that created all that we see. And I'm telling you, man, the atheist world went bananas when that happened because he was one of their leading voices. And that was an incredible story. His book is an incredible book. Not a Christian yet. He was raised in a Christian home, but he's at least said that there's a God. Okay. The ultimate question. What do you want to believe? That's my question to the guys that I talk to on the internet. What do you want? If you have determined that you are not going to believe in God, I don't want to spend time with all of this because you've already made up your mind. If, however, you're willing to take the evidence wherever it might lead and submit your life to that evidence, I'm all about talking with you. There are those who, like Anthony Flew, are intellectually honest and have said, I will do that. I want to know the truth, and I'll do whatever I have to do to find that, and I'll follow it. So that it really does come down to that. What does a person really want to believe? Well, that pretty much is it. I hope that I have presented a preponderance of evidence for God. And it's up to the viewer and you, the jury, to make your own decision. I believe, again, that the evidence for God is overwhelming, and science has done it. And the very thing that the atheists pin their hopes on has turned the tables and is actually showing that God is an intelligent designer. I believe that this view is gaining some traction. And if you look, you go to www.dissent, D-I-S-S-E-N-T, from Darwin.com, you will find hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands at this point, of scientists from all over the world who have signed on to the statement, we no longer believe that evolution answers the development of mankind. And these guys have their name, the colleges that they teach at, and what they teach. And that is critical, folks, because they could lose their jobs. The colleges read those lists. So those guys have put their career and their lives on the line to do that. And there are a lot of them, and they're from all over. Moscow University, Harvard, Yale, they're from all over. So I believe that evolution is in its death throes, and the fight that's going on, God Is Not Dead movie I thought was great. I don't know if y'all saw that. That was a great movie and a great dialogue between a student and a professor, an atheist professor and a believing student, and it was a great dialogue.